Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel and another Pillage faction review here as we work our way through the expansion factions of the East expansion for the game, which adds 3 more factions for us. So today we're taking a look at the Magyars, or the Hungarians. We're originally from the Central Asian region and moved essentially gradually towards the west, where then they caused all kinds of wonderful conflicts. So and basically, as it says here, right, they battled all the way from Constantinople to Spain and really just had a fearsome reputation. So, and really introducing to the game a more Eastern style type of fighting, which is the very prevalent use of horses and horse archers, backed up with discipline, like very extreme discipline. So, they're introducing a slew of special rules to us, which is really like what all these factions are doing to the game, whereas all the core factions, as you remember, basically just had like 1 or 2 special rules and maybe even some characters or something like that, or units. Here we're getting just we're getting that plus all kinds of gear and everything and other special rules. So they get access to the composite bow, which can fire up to 300 meters, and basically what that means in game terms for us is that it can actually shoot just 30 inches right off the bat without even getting into like elevation or anything like that. So really just adding superlative range. They also have sabers, which basically they don't get the typical hand weapon, so it's got a +1 penalty to hit some armor and full armor enemy figures wearing armor. So very effective against basically light or minimal armor, but not so much at punching through like heavy chain and plate. So also here, composite bows and horsemen are the 2 pillars of the armies. Therefore, these guys break one of the core rules of the game here, so the 25% limit on shooters and cavalry just doesn't apply to them. That's huge, considering all the other restrictions that are normally in place in the game to really keep things kind of evenly matched between the factions. Yeah, these guys ignore that. That being said, they're known for horsemen, so fighting on foot is not so much their thing. So their infantry just have a -1 penalty to all their defense rolls, and then -1 penalty to all their morale checks, and finally also a -1 movement penalty. And this stacks with other things like armor penalties, difficult terrain, and stuff like that. So basically their infantry is going to take a major backseat to the cavalry. So those are some hefty penalties. Their cavalry figures can also be equipped with composite bows, and basically same rules and restrictions as if they were infantry. And then they introduce another special character, as if they didn't already have all these other cool things going for them. But we're most likely mispronouncing that, but the Buck is an elite warrior from the Magyar bourgeoisie and has the means to equip themselves heavily. So a chieftain is automatically part of this group. But basically they can carry a spear, a saber, a composite bow, a shield, and or armor. And basically, therefore, a Buck figure can choose which weapons from their arsenal to use at the start of each combat. So basically, they're like a Swiss Army knife, or in this case, a Magyar Army knife, when they're dealing with these things, or when they're dealing with enemies and choosing what they want to do. So basically, they'll have the right tool for every situation. Now, once engaged, you can choose to change equipment during a fight, for example, during a multiple combat. And then finally, down here, they also have their unique talent. It's 50 gold, so spare horses. So basically any Magyar rider who loses their horse can get a new one. At the start of a movement phase, a cavalry figure that has become an infantry figure in the previous round can roll a d6. On a 6, you do find a new horse and become a cavalry figure once more. You don't get to move that turn, but otherwise you're basically good to go. Now, if the roll is a failure, the figure can move as normal but remains infantry for the rest of the game. So considering that you're largely going to be cavalry, right, it's probably a good investment. But that being said, only getting this on a 6, right, it's going to be situational when it does hit, unless you're just insanely lucky. But it is neat that you can essentially remount and go back to being cavalry. So all that work that the enemy did in taking out your horse could be wasted. But again, I think this is more of a situational one, but definitely needs some testing in real game examples. So getting into what they have, so they now add a new, again, type of unit. So kind of where the Berserker would normally be in the list here. They don't have that. They don't have Huskarls. No healers or wagons as well for these guys, right? And seeing their cost here, so the buck is basically just a hair under the chieftain as far as points go. And not that these guys would need it, and thankfully it's not the case here, but unlike like a berserker that has an extra wound as well, thankfully these guys don't add that on top of everything else. So unarmored and improvised is free, as you might expect. They do pay a little bit more for armor than some factions, right? A lot of times it's just like 5. So 10, though, is not too bad. Shields are 5. So spears, as we might expect, would be dirt cheap for these guys. Certainly no reason for them to have the Danax access. But hand weapons, and again, for these guys, that is the saber. So there's no just traditional hand weapon, but with the penalties that we described before. So 10, pretty typical for a hand weapon, or in this case, again, the saber. So no Danax. Moving on to missile weapons. So they have the slings, which are actually dirt cheap for them. Free javelins, which is something to consider potentially in certain situations, right? Free is good. Composite bows, just 25 across the board, so typical bow cost, and actually kind of a discount, right? Because it's just better than the regular bows. So we could, take some infantry and have some composite bows as well, just to have a little bit of that. But really, again, everything's going to be about the cavalry. And fortunately for them, they do get some of the cheapest cavalry out there at 20 gold. I know some other factions pay quite a bit for that. Now, another interesting restriction that they have, which compared to the other factions, in some cases is going to be kind of a deciding factor in certain situations. No banner, no warhorn. Obviously, warhounds wouldn't make sense for these guys, right? But the lack of the banner and the warhorn for what is a developed culture is a bit surprising there. But not that I don't think really necessarily need it, but it is surprising by its absence. So what do we get? So your base warrior costs, some gears fairly cheap for these guys. The composite bow, again, better than the regular bow, and fairly priced. And then very cheap horses. So it's going to take a fair bit of kitting out for these guys, right? Because we're going to need the warrior, the horse, whether we want armor or at least the shield on that horse, right? So we're already looking at like 35 to 40 points just to buy the body. And then, we need a weapon of some sort. So, horse archers are going to run us a pretty penny, but the fact that we have mobility and can keep the enemy at range and just constantly reposition is going to be pretty nasty to deal with. Then, spears for the cavalry, very cheap, right? To round that out, we could go with the sabers as well if we want to spend some more points. Chieftain, of course, has got to get some of the best gear, right? We don't want our chieftain going down. Then that extra buck, which again can have basically any weapon, and again, the chieftain is part of that too, so we could load up on multiple weapons to always have the right thing for the right situation, but again, gets pretty expensive. Other than that, they're just a more expensive warrior, but again, they have this ability to switch out with all these different weapons. So the big thing here is we get a whole bunch of neat special rules. Again, the saber, not all that great against heavily armored enemies, but we have basically an all cavalry list if we want it. We can essentially have everybody shoot as well, right? They ignore that. So they should ideally be able to soften the enemy up a little bit, cause a decent amount of casualties, and then get in there and do some combat all the way across the board there. And then again, the composite bow just being better than other bows flat out is pretty cool too. Let us know, guys, if you have a Magyar force. Have you had success with it so far? Have you kind of gone all in on the cavalry? Have you done a little bit of infantry? How have you kitted your guys out? How many buck have you fielded? And let us know if you've done the spare horses and if that's worked out for you too. So hit us up in the comments. Let us know what you think, and like and subscribe, and we'll go for the next one here where we wrap things up with the expansion and the Byzantines. Thanks for watching.